Hello and welcome to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. According to the Department of Justice, the channel you're watching now is an agent of a foreign, even hostile power. All the while, the DOJ refuses to explain why this is the case or even cite what laws we may have broken. But something else is in play. Critics warn RT is a test case for a wider campaign of media suppression. Cross-talking foreign agents, I'm joined by my guest, Lee Stranahan in Washington. He's an investigative journalist and co-host of Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. In Salt Lake City, we have Rocky Anderson. He is a civil rights lawyer, former mayor of Salt Lake City, and the 2012 nominee of the Justice Party for president. And in London, we cross to Marcus Papadopoulos. He's the editor of Politics First magazine. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want, and I always appreciate it. I always go to the person that got up earliest for this program. That means it's you, Rocky, in Salt Lake City. It's a long way away from Moscow. And looking, my introduction, the Department of Justice has forced RT to be signed as a foreign agent under the FARA Act. But they have cited no reason why. There is no complaint about our output of what we broadcast on this station here. No details whatsoever. No comparisons what we do or don't do compared to, let's say, Al Jazeera or BBC or CGTN. Nothing. We're separated completely in a different category. I can't come to any other conclusion that it is very spiteful, cruel, petty politics. Go ahead, Rocky, in Salt Lake City.
Well, I think there's no question about that. We're seeing almost a new McCarthyism in this country, and it's completely mindless. If people would realize that the First Amendment is really there to protect the people of this country and to promote an exchange of ideas and information and allow people the credit for being able to ferret out what they want to hear and what they can believe or not believe. This impacts all of us in this country when our own government is trying to restrict and even censor what we hear from other media. And we need to hear from other nations. It's a perspective that Americans have got to know. And it wasn't foreign media that was telling us all the lies that Judith Miller at the New York Times was telling us.
Very good example.
Leading up to Iraq, or the Washington Post about Jessica Lynch, to bolster support for that outrageous war. These were all myths that were perpetrated by the U.S. media, and we haven't seen anything like that from media from other nations.
One of the reasons...
What we do see is a different perspective.
Different perspective. Let me go to Lee in Washington. That's exactly correct here, because you've seen mainstream media, people have stopped watching it, they've stopped buying it, stopped clicking on it, and they're going elsewhere because they have lost the confidence in the mainstream media, the political establishment. And Lee, the people watching this program right now, no one's forcing them to watch it. It's a choice. I don't understand why the U.S. government should determine what propaganda is, and the U.S. government should determine what choices people make. Go ahead, Lee.
Well, I think it's because they are scared to death. They're absolutely, and by they, I mean the political establishment, not just the Democrats, not just the Republicans, the political establishment on both sides are scared to death that people are listening to alternative media. And let's throw in the media establishment as well. You got to remember, in the United States, I think it's 6 corporations that control 90% of the media. This is big business, right? And when people start listening to new media, when people can go to the news, not just to RT and not just to upstarts like the Huffington Post or Breitbart, both of which I've written for, but more importantly, to Twitter, to YouTube. And by the way, that's why we're seeing the other very scary trend now, which is that the tech companies are working to actually censor that media as well. So people realize that the establishment media is essentially a loss leader. In other words, when a guy like Jeff Bezos, head of Amazon.com,
and owner of the Washington Post, and the owner of the Washington Post, go ahead.
That's right. And a $600 million, well, let's do the math, right? $600 million deal with the CIA. Buys the Washington Post for $200 million.
It's not even...
Pretty good deal.
Pretty good deal.
Pretty good deal.
Amazing. But the Washington Post will never talk about that. Okay, talk about transparency. Marcus, let me go to you because, RT is being put in the spotlight, and I would say a target here. You yourself personally are a target in the UK media, and they're quite vicious in their attacks against you. Tell us more.
Yes, for me, Peter, this matter has become very personal. Recently, I was attacked by two members of the British Parliament, and the article and the report was run by the Times newspaper, in which I was depicted as a Russian propagandist, and because I'm a Russian propagandist, I should lose my parliamentary pass. Now, it is very, very callous, this attack. But then, Peter, we are living in very sinister times in which freedom of speech and freedom of the press in Britain and America is under attack. It's under attack by the British and the American government, who are employing one of their most formidable weapons, their media, to go after anyone in the public eye who has a high profile and who happens to disagree with what the American and the British governments are doing on the international stage. Let me say this very clearly, Peter. The British and the American establishments hate us. They hate us because of our tenacity. They hate us because of how persuasive we are. And ultimately, they hate us because we are exposing the reckless, criminal and murderous foreign policies of Washington and London. Media in Britain and America is insecure. It is afraid, and it is doing everything to try and destroy our names. They want to silence us. They want to put us back in our boxes. But the other point is this, Peter, is that we mustn't be under an illusion about who we're up against. We're up against some of the most powerful forces in the world. This is a contest. This is a David versus Goliath contest. But we all know what happened when David met Goliath. And
we all know, Marcus, that we all know on this program that we're on the right side of history, and they know they're on the wrong side. Lee, you wanted to jump in there in Washington. Go ahead, Lee. Go ahead.
Yeah, Peter. Yeah, let me mention something. Let me mention what Ryan, and by the way, I agree with Ryan. I'm a Republican, and I agree. And by the way, I'm the only Trump supporter on Sputnik. So much for the Russian media being pro-Trump, right?
Yeah, right.
I'm it. Now, I'm gonna mention something that Rocky was talking about. I want to use a more contemporary example that's going on right now. Iraq's still going on, obviously, but Syria, right? Back in 2013, when I was a writer for Breitbart, I looked into what was happening in Syria, and I was worried. It seemed like U.S. taxpayer dollars were going to fund the quote-unquote rebels, who I saw were killing Christians, among other people. And I said to myself, look, most Americans wouldn't agree with that. So I had to quit Breitbart to go over. I did a crowd-funded trip to Lebanon to interview Syrian refugees, okay? And it was obvious to me at that time what the U.S. was doing. And it was obvious to me that the so-called Syrian rebels were actually dangerous. And I came back, I was talking about the Caliphate and ISIS. Nobody was talking about that.
Right.
Clearly, the weapons for them came from the U.S. Now, when I said that as a conservative who was reporting that, why, when I say exactly the same thing on RT or on Sputnik, what's the problem there? And the answer is, well, let's explain what's going on with this FARA thing. It's very clear what they're trying to do here. They want to be able to say in articles, Stranahan, who, and by the way, they have not sent the note to Sputnik yet.
Not yet.
We're waiting.
Yet.
But they want to be able to say, whoever, Larry King, Jesse Ventura, Peter, whoever, right? They want to be able to say, who is required to file as a foreign agent, comma, said, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, okay.
And they want to be able to use that little phrase.
Exactly.
You see what I'm saying?
Let me go to Rocky. That's exactly it. It's the name and shame approach here. They can't fight our arguments. They can't fight our arguments because they know they don't have anything in their arsenal. And I would say that they've gotten so used to lying to the public and getting away with it. And then we hold fire to their feet. And that's what they don't like. And that's why they target each and every one of us to destroy our names, okay? Because they can't destroy the truth. Go ahead, Rocky.
That's exactly right. They are creating the conditions to making simply the ad hominem arguments so that they can paste these labels to people and instead of addressing the merits. And Peter, if we're ever going to see any of the conditions necessary for peace between people, greater understanding, we've got to have more accessible media. We've got to have, because that's the only way that we can learn about those things and about people and events that we don't personally observe. We've got to get it through the media, and to strangle important sources of information and different viewpoints. And it's going to get ratcheted up. Now the Russian government is saying, okay, you're going to do that to RT. We're going to do it to Radio Free Europe and Current Times, the television equivalent.
Do you know what?
And
Rocky, what's going to happen here?
We've been doing this for years.
Well, of course. And let me go to Marcus. But of course, when the Russian side retaliates, it's going to be called Russian aggression. What do you bet, Marcus, in London?
Well, that's going to be one of the negative, another one of the negative consequences of listing RT as a foreign agent, because the Russian government will have no choice but to take retaliatory measures. Russia, at the end of the day, is has self-dignity, has self-respect, and it has to stand up for itself. But Peter, there's another dimension to these horrendous, awful attacks on RT and guests on RT. Their reputations could be absolutely destroyed. And people who work for RT in Britain and America could find that their names are so badly affected that they're deprived of a livelihood.
Marcus, let me jump in here. We have to go to a hard break, gentlemen. After that hard break, we'll continue our discussion on foreign agents. Stay with RT.
It's the cradle of jazz.
As long as America has been America, we have been putting on this jazz funeral.
A city of climatic catastrophes, of alligators on the loose, of poverty and crime.
Over the years, about at least 12 members of my family, close members, been murdered.
Of street racing, in the heat of the night. This is New Orleans.
New Orleans is awesome, man. New Orleans is the best place in the world. Hey! Come holler at me.
"18 years ago, I travelled across the United States, exploring America's deadly love affair with the gun.
If a bad guy tried to get to one of my family members, he would have better luck with a butter knife against a grizzly bear than hurting one of my babies.
Since my book was published in the year 2000, more than 500,000 Americans have been killed by firearms in the USA.
We had a SWAT team, yes we did. Yes, this was in middle school. We go through drills and we put ourselves in real scenarios. It was interesting to see who actually got hit by the paintball gun.
I decided to return to the subject, to track down each gun owner who I'd met and photographed those years ago.
I don't know the answer, but we are not the problem.
Welcome back to Crosstalk, where all things are considered. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing foreign agents. Okay, gentlemen, the Department of Justice doesn't give any justification for its actions in forcing RT to sign on as a foreign agent. But I will read something here real quick here from the Director of National Intelligence, that report that came out on January 6th, okay, titled Assessing Russian Activities and Intentions in Recent U.S. Elections. This is what I had to say about RT. RT's reports often characterize the U.S. as a surveillance state and allege widespread infringement of civil liberties, police brutality, and drone use. I guess check, all are true. Okay, continuing here. RT also focuses on criticism of the U.S. economic system, U.S. currency policy, alleged, they even used the word alleged Wall Street greed, and the U.S. national debt. And some of RT's hosts have compared the U.S. to Imperial Rome, I guess that's me, and have predicted that government corruption and corporate greed will lead the U.S. to financial collapse. Rocky, what do you disagree with that? Because I think it's pretty good. Good assessment. It doesn't even mention what Marcus and I talk a lot about, foreign policy. But, you know, it's a pretty good checklist. Somebody watched some of the broadcasts. Go ahead, Rocky.
That sounds a lot like what I've been saying and writing for years, actually. So I don't know what it is anybody could find fault with there. But I will say, let them point to anything that could compare with the propaganda generated by the United States government and passed to the American people by our mainstream media. The Washington Post's abysmal story, the propaganda it passed on about Jessica Lynch, the soldier in Iraq.
Weapons of mass destruction.
Shot and stabbed and attacked by Iraqi soldiers. All of it absolutely false. And of course, Judith Miller and weapons of mass destruction. But Naira, very few people know the story of Naira, the world's largest public relations firm, paid millions of dollars
but why don't you
by Kuwait.
Condense it down? It was the incubator scandal, okay? Okay, she was the daughter of the ambassador. Yeah, a scam here.
Exactly.
Just a scam.
And this woman, this young girl was the daughter of the Kuwait ambassador of the United Nations, and all of the news media fell for it. Amnesty International fell for it. The President Bush was going around the country touting this just incredible story.
Rocky,
where is the accountability for the U.S. media? There's nothing comparable.
It's very interesting here to all of you. I don't see human rights groups coming to the aid of RT. They won't, because it's political, and they know it, and they're intimidated here. You know, Lee, let me go to you, because you over there at Sputnik. All media outlets make mistakes. We all make mistakes, and we own up to them when we make them, okay? But what they're attacking us for is our narratives. That is something different. And they cannot tolerate a different narrative that supports their fundamental material interests, intellectual interests, as if they're not very intelligent anymore. But anyway, they're friends, okay, and they're friends around the world. But they don't attack they can't attack our narratives, because that would and legitimize us by having a conversation. So you dismiss all of it. Go ahead, Lee.
Well, let me say, you know, filmmaker Michael Moore, for instance, is a guy who, I'm a Republican. I don't agree with Michael Moore on a lot of issues. But you talked about alleged Wall Street greed. He's talked about that, right? But I've actually worked with another filmmaker who made a whole movie going after alleged Wall Street greed. Yeah. And you may have heard him. He's a young filmmaker named Stephen K. Bannon. Now, Steve and I worked together on a film called Occupy Unmasked, but Steve Bannon made a film called Generation Zero, and people can look it up. Steve's a former Wall Street guy who's very critical, a former Goldman Sachs guy, but in the 80s, who's very critical of Wall Street. And Steve has come out expressly. Now, what I'm saying is, when you get Michael Moore and Steve Bannon agreeing, right, on an issue, I think it's something that actually you'd get about 80% of Americans to agree. And this is exactly why look, what they want to do is they want to discredit RT, Sputnik, anybody who's not officially going along with that narrative, so that it says to Americans, hey, don't even listen. And by the way, we don't just see this with hosts. We were talking about this on Fault Lines this morning, my radio show. We have people who've told us, we love the show, we love to listen to it. We do a morning radio show, so it's fun. We talk about politics, we crack jokes. My co-host, Garland Nixon, he's a progressive Democrat, I'm a Republican. But we agree on a lot of stuff, actually. We've had people tell us, Peter, they would love to call into the show just to, you know, be part of the show, and they're afraid to. They're afraid to call in because we're broadcast in Washington, and they work for the government.
Yep.
I just want you to think about that. That's a chilling effect where people, not as a guest even, just to call in and say, hey, I don't agree with you. Or,
it's very much
it's very frightening.
It's very much like when Chris Cuomo on CNN said, "Don't read those emails. Oh, we can read it for you. We'll tell you what it means." I mean, what a kook. Okay, no wonder journalism is basically no better than prostitution right now in the United States and the West in general.
Can I jump in?
Marcus, jump in. I know you always want to jump in. Go ahead, my friend.
2 points I want to make. When you read that statement out, Peter, by the Department of Justice, 2 words entered my mind. How ironical, because what they described is exactly how American mainstream media, conservative and liberal alike, portray Russia. Now, the second point I want to make is this, and I tried to make it just before we went for a break. The horrendous attacks on British and American citizens who work for RT not only could end their reputation and deprive them of a livelihood, but something even worse. Given the horrendous levels of anti-Russian hysteria in Britain and America, there is a lot of hatred, even amongst ordinary Americans and British people, towards Russia. So imagine an American nationalist or an English nationalist or someone in America or Britain who is mentally unsound watching a report about how American and British citizens are traitors by working for RT, they're propagandists. It is possible, and I emphasize the word possible, that these people could take it into their own hands to physically harm guests who go onto RT in Britain and America, or British citizens and American citizens who work for RT. Now, that is something that these repugnant politicians and mainstream media journalists in London and Washington are not thinking about. And I would also add this as well. Just look at the attacks. Look at the attacks. People who appear on RT are being referred to as uneducated, as imbeciles, and also one commentator in Britain has referred to them as mentally unwell.
No, but Marcus, one of the interesting things is, hang on here, Lee, hang on. One of the interesting things, because you're absolutely right, is that most of the people that are criticizing RT and criticizing people that come on RT don't know anything about Russia whatsoever, okay? That is the real poverty of the situation. You know, people that actually come here and meet people, spend a little bit of time here, they see something very, very different than the black and white gray imagery they're always getting. We're rapidly running out of time, gentlemen. Let me go to Rocky here, because I think there's a really important point we all have to talk about here, is that the major tech companies are getting on their knees to please Congress and these people in this witch hunt here. They are signing their own death warrant, is what they're doing. They are foolish. They'll watch someone. They'll sacrifice us. But when they come for them, who's going to be there? They're making a very big Google, Twitter, YouTube, all of that. Go ahead, Rocky. We're running out of time here. Go quickly.
Yeah, that's such an important point, because this is all part and parcel of this creeping authoritarianism in this country. We're seeing a president who is so demeaning of our own media if it doesn't go along with his point of view. And now to say that we're going to choke off different information and points of view from media outside of this country, this is a horrible betrayal of the American people and our right to decide what it is we're going to watch and listen to and read, and the points of view that we want to consider, and make up our own minds about these things. I've never seen the kind of foreign influence on media that we saw leading up to the Iraq War, or the support for the first Gulf War through the Naira manipulations.
Oh, but no. It should always be one direction. Only the West can influence everyone else, not the other way around here. You know, Lee, it seems to me, listening to what Rocky just said right there, is that liberals in America are creating the Soviet Union of America when you have this hermetically closed media box where no one can penetrate it. They only can hear messages. They can't hear anybody from the outside. That is very authoritarian and very dangerous, considering the level of trust that people have in the mainstream media in the United States and in the UK. Go ahead, Lee.
Well, that's why I think what we're doing on my radio show is so radical. It's not about me. Look, we got a Trump supporter and a Bernie supporter on the same show. You'd think if the commercial media wanted to appeal to a big audience. They would have looked at the election and gone, look at the size of Bernie's crowds, look at the size of Trump's crowds. It's a no-brainer, right? Why are we the only show that does that? Because neither one of us fit into the establishment narrative. And I got to say, let me just disagree with Rocky slightly. He's talking about to Iraq. Slightly disagree with him. Where the danger comes in, look, the CIA, I've been reading the history of the CIA in light of the new JFK stuff to come out. The CIA's first operation, 1948, was interfering in the Italian election. Right. It was literally the first thing that they did. They spent $100 million. Yep. That's history. That's not propaganda. It's on the CIA website. That's what they admit that they did. So this history goes back, actually, to the foundation and formation of the CIA. So, and I just want to take off on one thing that Marcus said, too. People getting called things. I've been called multiple times on Twitter a traitor. And I've had people say stuff like, traitors get shot. Yep. Right? Mm-hmm. And nothing happens to the people. Nothing happens to them. No. Because it's acceptable.
It's acceptable when some people can use hate speech. It's acceptable when they use it, but not others. That's another double standard. Right. Gentlemen, we've rapidly run out of time. Fascinating discussion. Many thanks to my guests in Washington, Salt Lake City, and in London. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.